what I do as a scientist, and I believe it's all scientists' obligation is to ask questions about what, how, when, and if, those kind of questions, to separate subjective issues away from objective issues. So as an economist, I can ask, well, what is the effect of doing such and such? Without asking whether the result or whether the act is good or bad, just ask what is the effect. And you're very much like a physicist. A physicist would ask, what is the independent influence of gravity on a falling object? He doesn't say whether gravity is good or bad. He just asks, what is the effect? Now that's the job of an economist. You say, well, if government legislates a minimum wage law, what is the effect? Or if government regulates oil prices, what are the effects? And so I believe that the duty of an economist is to supply policymakers with objective findings so that the policymakers can make judgments based on what they might consider what's good or bad. The basic laws of supply and demand govern all of our behavior, and I think that knowing something about economics can teach something systemically important about human behavior, namely that we all face constraints imposed on us by scarcity, and that we all seek to maximize those kind of things that we want. Now, just knowing those two things, you can predict a whole lot about human behavior, much more so than a sociologist who tries to get into a person's mind and act as if intentions, commitment, obligations, and those kind of things determine human behavior. Just for example, one can say, well, if the price of something goes down, people will do more of it. If the price of something goes up, people will do less of it. Now, that's a very, very simple principle, but it's very, very powerful in its predictive capability. For example, dealing with crime. That is, we know that criminals also respond to the law of demand. That is, if crime costs are low, then we expect a lot of crime. If crime costs are very high, we expect less crime. Now, so the way an economist would approach crime would be to raise the cost of committing crime, or raise the probability of being convicted if you commit a crime. Now, a sociologist might go the other way. He might want to sit down and tell a person, well, it's not a good idea to rob a bank. Well, he's absolutely wrong from an economic standpoint. That is, if you can get away with robbing a bank, that's a good idea because you have much more money than you get from working. Now, so just the vision of the way an economist approaches problems is entirely different from sociologists, and I think that is a more fruitful approach. There's only a finite amount of everything here on Earth. There's a finite amount of coal, there's a finite amount of land, there's a finite amount of time, et cetera, et cetera. Now, scarcity is to be distinguished from shortages. Shortages are something that happens because government imposes price controls or other kinds of regulations. So shortages can be eliminated by raising the price, or surpluses can be eliminated by lowering prices, but you can never get rid of scarcity. Scarcity is that punishment that was imposed upon us when we disgraced ourselves in the Garden of Eden.
Supply and demand kind of deals with scarcity, is that correct?
And that is absolutely right.
But shortage, when you say shortage, supply and demand cannot deal with that because in a sense the market is not being allowed to function, which is what creates the shortage?
That is absolutely right. That is, for example, New York is a classic example. Or let's say rent control is a classic example. In New York they have rent controls. In Washington, D.C. they have rent controls. The predictable consequence of rent controls wherever they're enacted is that they create shortages in housing. They create shortages In one way, that people at the controlled price, they want more housing than they would have wanted at the market price. And then in addition to that, since landlords cannot make what they consider a fair rate of return on their investment, they withdraw capital from the market, withdraw some of their housing from the market, and that contributes to the shortage. For example, in New York, according to one estimate that I read, approximately 30,000 housing units are abandoned each year. That is, landlords, they use up the house. That is, they don't make improvements, and so when it becomes uninhabitable, they just abandon it. Now, and it's tragic because New York land is some of the most valuable land in the world, and yet you have a set of circumstances that would encourage land owners just to walk away and leave a building. So holding prices down is the best way to get a shortage. On the other hand, the best way to get a surplus is to have price floors, such as we have in agriculture. That is, we give farmers a higher price for their product through various government programs than what the market will generate. So you'll see mountains of oranges, you'll see mountains of cheese, mountains of butter, and mountains of all kinds of goods. And it applies in the United States, and it also applies in the European communities that have the subsidies for farmers. When you tax something, you get less of it. When you subsidize something, you get more of it. I don't care whether you're talking about subsidizing wheat or subsidizing slovenly behavior. That is, if we have welfare programs, we have unemployment compensation, well, you'd expect to see more people on welfare. You expect to see more slovenly behavior if you subsidize it. You'll see more people choosing unemployment rather than taking the first job that comes along if you have very, very remunerative or attractive unemployment compensation. It's a basic principle of human behavior.